if Trump ignores the Supreme Court or defies the Supreme Court, that is a constitutional crisis. If they comply with it, life carries on. They're pretending to comply with the Supreme Court ruling whilst kind of refusing to effect the change that it would take. We're now in this awful pattern of kind of tail chasing when no one wants to actually act out the orders of the Supreme Court.
Any sense of the moral high ground is being evacuated, and evacuated really, really fast. We are not yet 100 days in to this administration.
Senator Van Hollen seems to be under the very confused impression that this MS-13 terrorist is his constituent. He is President Bukele's constituent. He is President Bukele's citizen. He is President Bukele's resident. He is not a Maryland man. He is not a Maryland anything. He is an illegal alien from El Salvador with a deportation order from the United States. He is not legally even allowed to be in our country. And if the entire Democrat Party was to work itself into a state of emotional hysteria to demand the return of illegal gang members and terrorists to our shores, then that 21% will soon be 15, and then it'll be 11, and then all they'll have left is the support of actual confirmed MS-13 members, and that will be the entire base of the Democrat Party.
That is Stephen Miller, Trump's henchman, his right-hand man, his voice on immigration. And they are discussing the abduction of a Maryland resident, a father, a man called Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who was taken on March the 15th to El Salvador without any due process. Last week, the Supreme Court decreed that Trump had got this wrong. They ordered the return of Albrego Garcia to America. What's going to happen now?
Because if nothing happens now, then the implication is that the Supreme Court stands for nothing, because it means that the president can ignore whatever they decide. And that is the very definition of what a constitutional crisis looks like, and it may be happening before our eyes. Welcome to the News Agents USA.
The News Agents USA.
It's John.
It's Emily. And you might remember that we have talked about this man, Albrego Garcia, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a little bit in the past. He was an El Salvadorian-born man who came to the US in 2011 when he was 16. He married an American woman and they have a child, an American child. And he was picked up off the streets when he was collecting his child, actually, from school, by ICE agents. They waited for his wife to arrive. She took care of the kid. And then Kilmar Abrego Garcia was essentially bundled off without any due process to a prison in El Salvador. It is a pretty awful place. Secot prison, it's one of these mega jails that you might have heard Trump boast about, El Salvador's President Bukele boast about. And this week we saw the spectacle of President Bukele of El Salvador sitting alongside Donald Trump, President Trump, in the Oval Office, discussing the fate of this man. Now, Trump's administration are insisting he's a terrorist. He was a member of a gang. He was somebody who should never have been in the US. And it's true, he arrived originally illegally. But he then gained protected status because of his fear of returning to that country. Because of those gangs, he gained protected status to stay in the US. So the fact that he was then picked up off the streets, sent to El Salvador, without any due process, is one of the things that is horrifying people who are wondering if America still has an immigration system that works within any kind of rule of law.
And the one thing that we're not saying, I mean, I don't know whether he's a member of MS13 or not. He hasn't been convicted of anything.
He has no convictions.
He has no criminal convictions at all. And it has just been asserted that he was a member of MS13, apparently based on the fact that he had a Chicago Bulls cap on his head, which was apparently one of the hallmarks of an MS13 gang member.
Yeah,
if anyone who was wearing a Chicago Bulls cap is going to be picked up, they're going to have to build an awful lot more prisons in El Salvador. But the fact of the matter is, he was picked up. It was challenged in the courts. It goes to the Supreme Court of the United States, and they rule, and remember, it's got a 6-3 conservative majority, they rule unanimously that the White House administration must facilitate, that was the word that was used in the ruling, his return so that there is a proper process. And the White House has admitted it was an error. It was an administrative error that meant he was ever sent to El Salvador in the first place. And now Donald Trump is saying, well, there's nothing we can do about it because he's in El Salvador and he's an El Salvadorian citizen. And so it's really up to the El Salvadorians to decide. And you've got President Bukele saying, oh, no, well, we want him here. We're not giving him up. And so this guy who was wrongly deported is stuck in this supermax prison 23 and a half hours a day in his cell.
Yeah. At this point, it doesn't really matter if you think he was a terrorist or not. And I say that because what we're talking about now is a ruling from the Supreme Court. That is where we're at now. And we are waiting to see if the government is going to listen or not. Now, if Trump ignores the Supreme Court or defies the Supreme Court, that is, as Soaps said, a constitutional crisis. If they comply with it, life carries on. And what they're choosing to do at the moment is this third way, which is really muddying the waters. They're not defying, they're not complying, they're pretending to comply with the Supreme Court ruling whilst kind of refusing to effect the change that it would take. And so Donald Trump was asked about this. He said, oh, well, that's over to Pam Bondi. She's the AG, the Attorney General. Pam Bondi then said, oh, well, the decision is Bukele's. And Bukele was then asked, whether he would return him. And he said, well, I couldn't return a terrorist, to America. I'm not going to be accused of smuggling terrorists into America. Well, the only people calling him a terrorist are the Americans who've deported him against the wishes of the Supreme Court. So we're now in this awful pattern of kind of tail chasing where no one wants to actually act out the orders of the Supreme Court.
Yes, because Donald Trump says, well, it's not up to me now, is it? It's up to President Bukele. And President Bukele says, well, I'm not going to release somebody who you think is a terrorist and push him back into America because that, and also he's got to face the law here because he is an El Salvadorian citizen, which is true. And so you've got someone who is wrongly deported, being held there. And as I say, we have no idea whether he is or he isn't. He has been found guilty of nothing. And on a suspicion and a hunch, they took someone with protected status and chucked him in this prison. And that is why it is such a fundamental issue. It's about the issues of due process. It's about the issue of upholding the law. It is about the issue of constitutional protection.
And it's about the issue of who's next,
yeah,
quite frankly, because you might not really care about putative gang members. You might not really care about El Salvadorians. You might not really care about putative gang members. You might not really care about El Salvadorians. You might not care about people who weren't born in the US who you think should be deported anyway because they're immigrants. But what is starting to happen, and you'll hear from a congressman who is now warning Hispanic citizens, who is now warning students on campus, who's now warning his own constituents to be careful about how they go out after dark, because people are being collected off the streets without due process and disappeared. And that is something no one saw coming in America in 2025.
But there is a raw politics to this as well, where, look, I think on Trump and the tariffs, he's on a losing wicket. I think he's doing really badly. I think the flip-flopping and the about turns of who's going to be facing a tariff and at what level has been a catastrophe in policy terms and will affect his popularity in America. I think this one, though, actually is playing quite well with the US population. They think there is a huge problem of illegal immigrants. They see Donald Trump getting tough and pushing these horrible people, these gang members covered in tattoos where their heads are being shaved. And I think that's playing pretty well with the American public. So the raw politics of it is, oh yeah, okay, so one or two people who shouldn't have been there have got washed up in it, but who gives a shit, frankly, because it's doing well anyway. And I think that is ugly, but I think that is the reality of Stephen Miller and all those around Trump who are saying, yeah, well, what's the big deal?
So Trump, next to Bukele in the Oval Office, was overheard. I suppose we might call it a hot mic moment, except I don't think there was an accident in what he was saying. He mutters these words.
Homegrowns are next. The homegrowns. You got to build about 5 more places. Yeah.
What he's saying is homegrowns. In other words, American-born citizens. And then he goes on to explain when he's asked about it, yeah, anyone who doesn't behave well on American soil should be shipped off to one of these mega jails. And he says to Bukele, I think we're going to need 5 more. What do you do with that? I mean, I guess there are 2 strands of thought. One is he's just trying to divert attention away from his tariffs fiasco. So actually, he'd much prefer people to be getting up in arms about this, because then it stops people talking about the economy and what the stock market's doing and whether he's kind of lost face over that about turn. But if he's serious about it, then we are onto a whole new level of what he sees his job being now, which is not to allow the judiciary to do its job, not to allow for the rule of law to do its job, but to summarily remove people from America without a process, without a court, without a trial, even homegrowns, because, why, hey, they're next.
Well, look, let's face it, we've done that here in Britain. I mean, we used to, convicts would go to Australia. Back in the day, they'd be shipped off. Transportation was a policy that we had in the 19th century.
Yeah.
Are you really going to say that someone who was born and bred in Oregon is going to be shipped off to El Salvador, even though they are US passport holders, to serve their prison cell, because that will serve them, that will show them what's what? I cannot see it happening at all. I think that would be a line that he would be crossing. But, Donald Trump does this as a kind of, he's spitballing, as they'd say in the States. He's just throwing it out there. He knows a lot of people will go, yeah, bloody right. Send them off to El Salvador. That will teach them. That will teach them how to stand up straight and learn a bit of discipline in their lives. And I suspect, it will never happen. But Trump loves the idea that people are talking about it.
I suppose what you have to understand is if the evidence against the people he was sending were tight, then you wouldn't actually need to violate the Constitution to put them in prison. The reason that he's deporting people to a prison overseas is because it helps him look like he's being tough on criminals without ever having to investigate whether they are or not. So fundamentally, this comes back to a matter of presidential lawlessness, because it suggests that the administration won't abide by any court orders it does not feel like complying with.
The idea that criminal justice is meted out, well, guilty, you've got that tattoo, or your eyes are too narrow, your eyes are too close together, that's certainly a sign of criminality, 10 years for that. You can't be serious and think of America as a bastion when it is sort of one time lecturing the treatment by the Chinese government of the Uyghurs and all the rest of it. If you're just summarily deporting people, any sense of the moral high ground is being evacuated, and evacuated really, really fast. We are not yet 100 days in to this administration.
Well, joining us now is Congressman Juan Vargas. He's the Democrat US representative for California, and he's been highly involved, watching very closely this case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. What do you understand the Trump administration's position now? Are they going to comply with the law or break it?
Well, it's really important because it's being abused. This is a very old law that was passed really at the beginning of our nation's history, because there was a thought that maybe some of the people that were in the country from other countries, that they would somehow disrupt our very new republic. However, most of it's the old Alien and Sedition Acts. Most of them were repealed. This one survived, and it has been abused. This is how they got Japanese Americans during World War II incarcerated with no process, nothing. They just simply took people that were Japanese Americans and put them in these concentration camps throughout the United States. And once again, it's being abused by the president here. All they say is, look, there's an invasion. We're under attack, which of course is not true. I live here in San Diego, one of the safest cities, frankly, in the world. We're not under invasion. I can tell you, I'm a few miles here from the border, literally a couple miles, and it's been abused. So it has to be repealed. It's outrageous what the president's been doing with this act, and it's outrageous how this act has been used throughout history.
Donald Trump is abusing this right now with the deportation of American residents or citizens without any due process to an El Salvadorian prison. We've seen one example of a man, Albrego Garcia, who they admitted was an administrative error to deport. What is going to happen with that case now?
Well, obviously, that's the one we're fighting because it's a very dangerous situation that Mr. Abrego Garcia finds himself in. What happened in his case was this. He had a fear that the gangs, a local gang in El Salvador, would kill him. So he came to the United States. He asked for asylum. The court took a look at the facts and said, yes, you are correct. You have a good case, and granted him asylum. So he was in the United States legally. He committed no crime. He did nothing wrong. Next thing you know, he gets nabbed by the federal government. He gets deported. And where do they put him? Right back in the prison where this potential gang is that was looking for him. So he's in a very dangerous situation. That's why we're fighting so hard to get him back. I've had the opportunity to talk to his mother and to his wife, and I have to tell you, they're just frightened to death. And they told me the history. They said, he was resisting the gangs, so that's why they wanted to kill him. It wasn't that he was a gang member, never was. And it's outrageous that he's being held in the most dangerous place for him. And that's why we're trying desperately to get him back.
So do you understand now what the Trump administration's line is? Because a week ago they were telling us it was an administrative error. Today we heard from Trump's press secretary that she thinks he is a terrorist and a gang member. This week the Supreme Court has said that the government has to facilitate his release from El Salvador. And we don't yet know if Trump's going to comply or not.
It's interesting because I'm an attorney myself. And what I see right now happening in our country is something I never expected. The reality is that we're acting as if, we're a country that's lawless. I was in El Salvador for part of the war as a Jesuit during their civil war back in the 80s. And they would literally kidnap people off the street. They would disappear them. And oftentimes they'd end up dead or in some prison being tortured for many years. And here in this situation, we have a situation where, again, the guy gets nabbed off the street, gets, deported. We didn't know for a while where he was. We found out, obviously, he's in this horrible prison. He's there now. And the court says, clearly you guys made a mistake, bring him back. And the government says, well, we can't. And look, here's the president of El Salvador that we just spoke to. So he'll tell you, look, he can't bring him back. I mean, it is ridiculous. It's like two dictators sitting there talking to each other, telling lies. And we're somehow supposed to, believe them. It's outrageous. I mean, again, I never expected anything like this in the United States. It really is lawless.
Do you know how Mr. Abrego Garcia is? I mean, do you have proof of life?
We do have proof of life. Yes, that we do have as of a couple of days ago. So we were able to confirm that he's alive. We don't know his condition, but we do believe that as of 2 days ago, he is alive, yes. What condition, I have no idea.
Yeah. People have talked about a constitutional crisis. If you get a Supreme Court ruling, judgment, that the president then chooses to ignore. Are we at that point now?
We're getting there. We're very close. Now, so far, the administration has said, we're trying to comply. The truth is they're not, but at least there's the lie that they're trying to comply. So they're not saying, we don't care what the court says, we're not going to do it. That's when you get to really the constitutional crisis. Now, they're close to it at the trial court level. And that's why the judge in this case has said, okay, I want some information. I want to see some facts here. What are you really doing to try to get this guy back? So she's given a week to get these facts back to her. Now, we'll see what the government does. If the government decides not to comply with these interrogatories and also providing some of the higher ups to be able to be deposed, then I think you're right there at a constitutional crisis. I mean, it's been claimed that there was Andrew Jackson and others that said, the court made their decision. Let's see how they enforce it. It is interesting that the enforcement mechanism in the Constitution is not very strong. It's just that everyone, frankly, follows the law. And once the Supreme Court decides something, you follow it. You don't like it necessarily, but you follow it.
So one of the things
we're bumping up against this right now.
Yeah. So one of the things I've read is that the Supreme Court judgment is neither as favourable for the Liberals as the Liberals would like it to be, people like yourself, and it's nothing like as favourable as the White House would like it to see. It is much more nuanced. Does it end up back at the Supreme Court for them to give a clearer judgment on it?
I got to tell you, I don't think it was unclear. I read it, and the word facilitate, that's what everyone's hanging their hat on. What does it mean to facilitate? Now, I think there's where the court, in my opinion, was clearly saying, bring the guy back, but they hadn't determined yet what they can make the federal government do. And the reason for that, again, and I do know a little bit about international law, is that we do have to remember that Mr. Abrego Garcia is actually a Salvadoran citizen. He's not an American citizen. So now he's back in his country of origin, El Salvador. So it's not clear whether the courts in the United States can order the federal government of the United States to ask or order El Salvador to return one of their citizens to the United States. That's where it gets complicated. I don't think it's complicated in the sense the court said, get the guy back. I think they used that squishy word, facilitate, because of the complication or the interaction with international law.
Yeah, because they can't tell Bukele what to do. Can I ask
right.
you whether it's changed the kind of advice that you're giving in San Diego to your own constituents, to voters, to students on campuses? I mean, is there something that you are now telling people they should be doing that would never have crossed your mind before now?
Yeah, absolutely. To protect yourselves. I mean, it's fascinating to me. Again, when I was in El Salvador, I was a Jesuit at the time studying to be a priest, and they told us to protect ourselves. And that was, never be out at night because you could be nabbed and then you'd disappear and you'd never be heard from again. They said always walk with somebody else to make sure that they can get the information to somebody else to try to help you or save you. And I'm telling people the same things. Protect yourselves in any way that you can. You have to follow the law, obviously. But if someone knocks on your door and tries to come in, to ask for you, make sure that there's a warrant. If they don't have a warrant, don't open your door. There's a whole bunch of things that, unfortunately, we have to tell people to protect themselves, because you see how it's happening now. You have these masked people that are pulling people off the street. I mean, it almost like a Pinochet Chile or, a dirty war in Argentina. It really is getting ugly. And you got to tell people, protect yourselves to make sure that harm doesn't come to you. You could find yourself in some prison, some notorious prison, when you didn't do anything wrong. And especially a person like him that had every right to be in the United States.
Congressman, can I ask you about just the raw, crude politics of this? Yeah. Stephen Miller was on Fox News last night saying, if the Democrats want to make a big fuss about this, just go ahead, make our day, because frankly, your support stands at around 20% now. It's going to go down. It's going to go even further down because the American public are supporting what we are doing.
Well, you just mentioned a person that I think is the devil himself personally, Stephen Miller. I mean, that guy, I don't think he has a soul, but putting that aside for a second, yeah, we're at a very low percentage. So are they. The truth of the matter is that the sympathy that you see, the outpouring for these people who are innocent and haven't done anything wrong, they're the ones that the American people clearly support. And once again, it's ugly how they're scapegoating people. it's a very difficult situation. You probably see over my shoulder across there. That's of people that cross the border, they're undocumented, and they die in the desert out here. And no one knows who they are because there's no information about them. These kids made this cross of the man that they found out there, and that's why I have it there. And it's been in my office here in San Diego. And this is a very difficult situation in San Diego. I mean, I don't deny that. And because of the injustice and everything, everyone's numbers have come down. That's the reality. The other thing, of course, I'm a politician. I can tell you, as you guys know overseas from us, that the people in charge, when the economy doesn't do well, get blamed. And yeah, that's what happened to us. We were in charge. The economy wasn't doing well, and we were blamed. The truth is, though, now the Republicans are seeing the same thing. They're seeing their their support erode dramatically because of horrible things that they're doing.
Do you think that Hispanic communities are safe in America?
Well, that's a very good question. There's always been some discrimination. There's no doubt about that. But it wasn't the case that many of us didn't feel safe. I think we felt safe, just discriminated against, but safe. I think now, certainly a lot of Hispanics don't feel safe. I've heard now from a number of people that were pulled over who are American citizens and asked for documentation. And they looked at them and they said, we're American citizens. We were born here. I mean, they speak English as well as I do or anybody else does. And they were still interrogated on the street. So I do think that the fear level is gone way up. And once again, what happens to someone that's an American citizen that doesn't speak English well, but is a naturalized citizen and doesn't happen to have his papers with him? I mean, does he get deported to El Salvador, even those from Mexico? I mean, it really is something that I never thought we'd experience here in the United States, and certainly not here in California.
You're drawing parallels with Pinochet. You're talking about dictators. You're talking about people getting pulled over. I mean, you're a congressman, and you are giving off a vibe of really having very little confidence in Congress itself right now to stop this.
Well, it's interesting. I do like history, and I give these tours all the time in Washington of the Capitol. And one of the things that's interesting, when the constitutional founders, when our founding fathers, when they wrote the Constitution, the second article is of the presidency, and they put enormous power in the presidency because they always expected that we would pick the best person. And of course, for them, that was George Washington. And again, they picked him twice, and he was elected unanimously twice. Never happened in our history since then. And so they always expected the best person. And that's also why they created the electors, so they could pick, again, it wouldn't be direct vote. And instead, now we have one of the worst people you could find. And unfortunately, because of the way the Constitution is written, they give the presidency enormous power. And I don't think they ever expected it would be abused in the way it's being abused today. They always expected a person like Washington that would, stay within the limits of their power. What he's doing right now, and the courts are telling him left and right, you're abusing your power. What you're doing is unconstitutional. And some judges, even traditional conservative judges, are saying this is outrageous. This isn't even close to constitutional. I don't think that anyone ever expected this. And again, we're heading towards a very lawless government. And Congress has some power, of course, but when you have the Republicans that are afraid of their supreme leader here, I mean, really is a dictator, all of a sudden, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot that can be done because, again, the mechanisms of government are in the hands of this person who, has no respect for the law. I mean, he's a felon, to be frank, but everybody knows that. But he has no respect for the Constitution. He just tries to do what he can get away with. And that's what he's attempting to do now. And this Supreme Court said, as long as it's official, as long as you sign it on the desk there, you can do anything you want. You won't be prosecuted criminally. He goes, oh, great. I'll do anything I want then. And that's what he's doing.
Congressman Vargas, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate your time, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First, when it comes to Harvard, as I said, the president has been quite clear they must follow federal law. He also wants to see Harvard apologize, and Harvard should apologize for the egregious anti-Semitism that took place on their college campus against Jewish.
So that is Caroline Leavitt, the president's spokesperson in the White House briefing room, saying Harvard needs to apologize. And what has happened at Harvard University, the most prestigious academic institution in America, and maybe even the world, is that they have refused to bend the knee to Donald Trump over changes that he is demanding in the governance, in the teaching, in the behaviour of students, of what they can and cannot say, what they can and cannot protest. And he's saying, we're an academic institution. And if you're going to withhold funding from us, the federal funding of $2 billion, then screw you, go ahead, make our day. Now, on the question of anti-Semitism, there are various steps that Harvard University has taken, but they are just not going to say, we are going to run this institution according to Donald Trump, because Donald Trump does not run Harvard University.
Yeah, and I think what has happened this week is that Harvard has looked across at the bullying that a fellow university, highly respected, regarded university was getting from the Trump administration. This was Columbia last month. And Columbia was put in the same position of having to acquiesce to Trump's demands or lose their funding. And Columbia decided to bite the bullet. And they said, well, we're going to clean up our act. We're going to make sure that, no students on campus feel persecuted, and we'll do what you say. The $400 million that was being withheld in federal aid still hasn't come to them. So I think at this point, Harvard, who is in a way lucky to go second, the most prestigious university, I'm taking my life in my hands here, I think in the world, and the richest university, has decided that it's just more important to get this right. So Harvard announced that it wouldn't agree to Trump's administration terms, and it made a very clear statement. Neither Harvard nor any other private university can allow itself to be taken over by federal government. Accordingly, Harvard won't accept the government's terms as an agreement in principle. So cheers have gone up, basically, all over the campus, that finally we have found a spine. We have found somebody, and admittedly somebody in a position of huge power and influence, to say, we can't lie down and take this. Because if you start to allow the erosion of the universities by decree of what the federal government wants to see, then you've basically kind of washed your hands of independence of thought. You're heading to an autocracy. I mean, I was on a campus in Istanbul about a month ago, and Istanbul has been, I think, at the forefront of what is happening to universities. Every day, the lecturers and the teachers get together to protest for 15 minutes at 12 o'clock about the politicisation of their university. On this university campus, the students have been told not to play chess. Right, chess club has been abolished because it is seen as subversive, the overthrowing of the king, right? They're not allowed to talk about areas of Turkish history that they find, unpalatable to the administration. Like, let's just stick to the safe stuff. Let's talk about, I don't know, Turkey and NATO, or Turkey and Europe, Turkey and the rest of the world. And the students and the lecturers are going through this whole process now of finding what it's like when your government steps in, brings in more, in Turkey's case, Islamist scholars, Islamist teachers, bending to Erdogan's will, because that's the way that you get jobs now on campus. And what Trump is doing, and he's a big fan of Erdogan, is looking to this model and saying, yeah, actually, I don't like the messages coming out of these American Ivy League colleges, most of which do not support him, would not support him. And so what am I going to do? I'm going to withhold their money until they stop doing what they do.
Well, there's the small issue, and it's not a small issue, but the small issue of what is happening on these colleges, and the wider of what it signifies. I mean, the small issue is, the idea that there's this external body saying we can patrol, police what you teach, what viewpoints you are giving, is kind of pretty sinister sounding, because that is effectively thought control, right? You're not going to espouse students to these ideas. The whole idea of being a student is you will get exposed to loads of ideas.
Yes, and you get most of them wrong.
And you get most
then
of them
work
wrong,
it out.
and you find yourself defending some really stupid causes. The wider issue, and I think this is really important, is that we have seen Donald Trump take control of Congress, where nobody has a spine. We have seen him take control of the Senate. We have seen him take control of the Republican Party. And we have seen that although the judiciary is putting up some kind of protest, it's not huge. Now he's going for the cultural institutions like academia, where he thinks that his supporters won't mind him roughing up the Harvards and the Yales and the Princetons and the Brown and the Columbias of this world, because it will be popular with his base. And so you have the President of the United States absolutely rubbishing one of America's greatest cultural institutions, Harvard, and saying Harvard can no longer be considered even a decent place of learning and should not be considered on any list of the world's great university or colleges. Harvard is a joke. I mean, the idea that the person who's meant to be the champion of the United States is trashing this most venerated of US institutions for its scholarship, and let's not just be fancy about this, for its medical research, for the science, for keeping America ahead in the race for AI. Where do you think all this stuff happens? It happens at places like Harvard.
I do think this is actually part of a much bigger social revolution. And I think it is a cultural revolution. Clearly, it's a political revolution. But there is something, I'm going sort of carefully here, but there's something almost Marxist about it, which is that I think Trump is now waging war on a whole class of professions. And you could call them the knowledge workers, but it's not blue collar. It's people who talk for a living, people who analyse for a living, people who research for a living. And I think that the goal ultimately isn't just to shatter a few institutions. It is to crush the authority, to crush the power of so many of these professions, to weaken a whole social class. It is consultants, it's administrators, it's bureaucrats, it's professors, it's bankers, it's scientists, it's journalists. It's the kind of, I suppose, white-collar workers who do well in the information age. And it fits some sort of a pattern. And I guess we're always looking for, we're looking for logic in Trump, aren't we? We're looking for the plan. And I do think this is a bit of a plan that, combined with what he's trying to do on tariffs, it is a reorganisation of economic development. It's almost the opposite. Instead of trying to get people from a low-value job, and I mean by low value, I don't mean that their work isn't valuable. I mean that it doesn't pay as well, to high value jobs. Instead of trying to move your whole population from blue collar to kind of white collar, it's going, oh no, I don't want to do that. I want to get rid of white collar jobs, get more people into manufacturing, get rid of all the academics, get rid of the intellectuals. I want more people doing manufacturing. And so it is a complete backward step reversal, which feels quite Marxist. I mean, it feels genuinely like a plan is afoot to wipe out a class of people that Trump doesn't particularly like.
But, I mean, it's so replete with irony, isn't it? Because you look at where American growth and wealth has been generated. It's been generated in the tech industry with brilliant software engineers, AI and all of that, the kind of the wonderful world that takes place in Silicon Valley that has changed, the way we communicate with the world has fundamentally changed through smartphones, through laptops, all the rest of it. That is because of people being clever and having gone to clever institutions where they've got big brains.
Including Trump, including all his children.
Yeah, exactly.
He was an alumni of Wharton Business School, right? It's one of the best schools in the country. So he goes between, doesn't he? Between sort of loving the elites and hating the elites, wanting to be elite, wanting to be part of that whole scene, and then trying to crush it at the same time.
But crushing the generators of wealth. I mean, if you look at the sort of, trade deficits, the reason that Britain can say we do not have a trade deficit with the United States is because they export so many services industry, where these clever consultants come over and tell you how your company could run more efficiently if you employ them. These are clever people. Yeah. There is nothing wrong with having brilliant scientists who find cures for incurable diseases hitherto. That's what we want. And yet Trump is trashing those very institutions itself, as you say, to kind of he wants men's jobs.
It is a kind of class warfare. It's just not one that we thought we would see.
Well, it's the terror of the French Revolution in its modern 21st century guise living in Washington, D.C.
Well, look what's happened now. Fewer than 100 days, this new administration has done so much damage and so much destruction. It's kind of breathtaking it could happen that soon. They've taken a hatchet to the Social Security Administration, pushing an additional 7,000 employees, 7,000 out the door in that time.
Well, look who's back. It is one Joe Biden, former president of the United States, who looked well, but sounded pretty fragile. And interesting that his first attack line, his first speech since he left office, since Trump came in, was on Social Security and what Trump is doing there, 7,000 employees. He will have thought pretty hard, I think, about the place that he felt he could add value in a speech like that. And Social Security is somewhere that Donald Trump sounds quite defensive. And it's about people, and it's about their pockets, and it's about their retirements, and it's about their money.
But I guess the thing is, how much does Joe Biden help the Democrat cause by coming back out and reminding people of him sounding tired, sounding old, sounding behind the curve? I don't know. I just think that,
Doesn't help.
Doesn't help at this particular stage.
I mean, the question, I suppose, is when you see him there, could you imagine him as president now? Not really.
Not really. Not really. And that was the impossible position that the Americans were put in, that until, June of last year, it was Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. And but for the catastrophic CNN debate, he would have probably stayed there.
I was asked last night at a dinner why they, whoever, us, everyone, covered up the fragility of Joe Biden for so long. And it was something that you asked right at the time. Will there be backlash? Interesting, this month, a couple of books are coming out looking at who knew what about, Joe Biden's sort of frailty at the time. And I don't really think I've answered it in my mind, except that we don't have a parliamentary system. We said at the time, we don't have anyone who walks in and removes somebody. And so you're left with whatever you see from the outside, which is basically Jill Biden and the coterie of very close advisors.
Do you remember when you and I were at a very posh dinner in Washington in, I think it was February of last year.
Super Tuesday.
Yeah, Super Tuesday of last year. A huge table of good and the great were there, and we asked the question, will Biden be the candidate? Yeah. Because it was obvious to us, and we had been saying it on the podcast, that he looked frail and they looked like there are issues and you can't just wish them away.
Yeah.
And we were absolutely told 100% by everybody around that table, Joe Biden will definitely be the candidate in November.
And that he wouldn't do the presidential TV debates.
Yeah.
So actually, wrong on both counts.
We'll be back next week. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
The Newsagents USA.